A transatlantic flight, a seat in business class, paid for and confirmed. For Dr. Danielle Sterling, it was supposed to be a routine trip to a vital international conference. But when a flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder decided her seat would be better occupied by someone else, the routine flight turned into a public battle of wills. The flight attendant, Brenda, used every tactic she could think of: sweet-talking, guilt-tripping, and finally, open threats, to force this unassuming black woman to move. She thought she held all the power at 35,000 feet. She was wrong. Because when Dr. Sterling finally reached into her briefcase, she wasn't pulling out a boarding pass. She was pulling out a level of authority that would not only end the argument, but would ground the flight attendant's career for good. The hum of the Airbus A350-1000 was a familiar symphony to Dr. Danielle Sterling. It was the sound of progress, of engineering perfection, of 1,000 intricate parts working in harmony to defy gravity. As the director of the FAA's Office of Airworthiness Standards, she didn't just hear the hum. She understood it. She could mentally picture the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engines spooling up, the complex hydraulic systems pressurizing, the fly-by-wire controls performing their silent, million-times-a-second ballet. Her window seat, 7A, aboard Transatlantic Air Flight 112 from Washington Dulles to Zurich, was her sanctuary for the next 8 hours. It was a seat she had specifically chosen months in advance, using her own personal funds to upgrade to the Polaris-style business cabin. It afforded her privacy, a lie-flat bed for some much-needed rest, and a small desk where she could review her keynote address. The International Aviation Safety Symposium in Zurich wasn't just another conference. She was the headline speaker. Her presentation was on next-generation composite materials and the evolving regulatory framework required to ensure their safety. It was her life's work, the culmination of a PhD from MIT and 2 decades of tireless dedication to making the skies safer for everyone. Danielle was a woman of deliberate, quiet elegance. Her charcoal grey pantsuit was impeccably tailored, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. At 48, her face was framed by a few distinguished silver strands at her temples, which she wore with the same confidence as her academic and professional accolades. She projected an aura of calm authority, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. She'd already settled in, her briefcase stowed neatly under the footrest, her noise-cancelling headphones resting on the side console, and a glass of sparkling water perspiring gently on its coaster. The pre-departure bustle was winding down. The scent of jet fuel and recycled air was slowly being replaced by the subtle fragrance of the cabin's air freshener and the faint aroma of roasting nuts from the galley. She watched out the window as the ground crew disconnected the jet bridge, their movements precise and practiced. Boarding was nearly complete. A few last-minute passengers hurried down the aisle, their faces a mixture of relief and stress. Danielle paid them little mind, her attention focused on the final edits to her speech on her tablet. The words flowed easily. She was in her element. The world of aviation was a world of rules, physics, and protocols. It was logical, orderly, and, for the most part, fair. It was a world where competence, not colour, was supposed to be the final arbiter. The cabin door was closed with a reassuringly solid thud, and the lead flight attendant made the welcome announcement. Danielle powered down her tablet and placed it in her briefcase, preparing herself for takeoff. She closed her eyes for a moment, a small pre-flight ritual of hers, not of prayer, but of mental preparation. She envisioned the aircraft's takeoff roll, the rotation, the positive rate of climb, the landing gear retracting. She was, in every sense of the word, a creature of the air. This was her world, and in seat 7A, she was precisely where she was supposed to be. She felt a sense of peace. It was a peace that would be shattered in less than 5 minutes. The disturbance started as a low murmur from the aisle a few rows behind her. Danielle, lost in her thoughts, initially filtered it out as typical cabin noise. But the tone was wrong. It wasn't the pleasant chatter of excited travelers. It had a sharp, complaining edge to it. Then a figure appeared beside her seat. A flight attendant, whose name tag read Brenda, smiled a smile that was wide but didn't reach her eyes. Brenda had the brittle, overly coiffed look of someone who had been in the job for a long time and believed her seniority made her the absolute monarch of the cabin. "Ma'am," Brenda began, her voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that set Danielle's teeth on edge. "I have a small favor to ask of you." Behind her stood a couple, Mark and Tiffany Henderson. They looked flustered and indignant. Mark, a large man in a polo shirt that was a size too small, had his arms crossed, while Tiffany, adorned in designer athleisure wear, looked as if she'd just been forced to witness a crime. Danielle offered a polite but reserved look. "Yes? How can I help you?" "Well," Brenda continued, gesturing vaguely towards the Hendersons, "we have a couple here who were unfortunately separated due to a late booking. Mr. Henderson is in 9G and his wife is back in 14B. They're quite distressed, and we were hoping you might be willing to take Mrs. Henderson's seat in 14B so they can sit together." Danielle processed the request. It wasn't a favor. It was a significant downgrade. Seat 7A was a prime, private window pod. 14B was a middle seat in the less desirable rear section of the business cabin, right near the galley and lavatories. She had specifically selected and paid a premium for her current seat. "I'm sorry to hear about their situation," Danielle said, her voice even and calm. "But I chose this seat for a reason, and I'd like to remain here. Perhaps there is another solution for them." Brenda's plastic smile tightened. "Oh, it's just that this is the only other single passenger in a window seat up here. It would be such a simple switch. It would really help us out." Tiffany Henderson chimed in, her voice a whiny drawl. "We're on our way to our second honeymoon. It would just mean so much to us to be able to start it together." Danielle looked from the Hendersons back to Brenda. She understood wanting to sit with a spouse, but she also understood the principles of booking travel. "I do understand," she repeated, her tone hardening just a fraction. "But no thank you. I'm preparing for a presentation, and I specifically need this space and quiet. I won't be moving." Brenda's facade of politeness began to crack, revealing the steel beneath. "Ma'am, it's a very simple request. We always try to accommodate our passengers and create a pleasant atmosphere. It's just a seat." "For you, perhaps," Danielle replied coolly. "For me, it is the seat I selected and paid for. The answer is no." Mark Henderson huffed loudly. "Unbelievable. Some people are just so selfish." Danielle ignored him, turning her gaze back to the window, a clear signal that the conversation was over. She had been polite but firm. She had stated her position clearly. In the orderly world of aviation, that should have been the end of it. The flight attendant should have accepted her refusal and tried to find another solution, perhaps asking another passenger, or offering the couple compensation to fly separately. But Brenda Walsh was not an ordinary flight attendant. She saw Danielle's refusal not as a passenger's right, but as a personal challenge to her authority. And in her eyes, Danielle, a black woman sitting alone in a prime business class seat, was an easy target to pressure. Brenda took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and decided to escalate. She was going to get her way, one way or another. The pleasant atmosphere she claimed to be preserving was about to be the first casualty. Brenda did not walk away. Instead, she leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, yet menacing, whisper. "Ma'am, perhaps you don't understand. This is a very full flight. The Hendersons are very valued Premier Gold members with us. I really need you to do this. It will make things easier for everyone." The veiled threat was unmistakable. "Do as you're told, or I will make this difficult for you." Danielle's spine stiffened. She had dealt with microaggressions and thinly disguised prejudice her entire life, from her undergraduate days as one of the only black women in her engineering program, to navigating the old boys' club of Federal Aviation oversight. She recognized the pattern instantly. It was the soft-spoken dismissal, the assumption that her boundaries were negotiable, that her comfort was expendable. She turned her head slowly from the window, her gaze meeting Brenda's. Her voice remained low and steady, a stark contrast to the flight attendant's rising agitation. "And perhaps you don't understand me. I have also been a Premier Platinum member with this airline for over a decade. I selected seat 7A in April for this specific flight in August. My status and my ticket entitle me to this seat. I have declined your request." The conversation is over. A younger flight attendant, Chloe, who had been serving drinks nearby, paused, her eyes wide with apprehension. She could see the situation souring rapidly and shot Brenda a nervous look, a silent plea to just let it go. Brenda ignored her junior colleague. The public refusal had incensed her. She straightened up and raised her voice, ensuring the passengers in the surrounding seats could hear. "Ma'am, I am trying to be reasonable here. There is no need to be difficult. The Hendersons just want to sit together. Are you really going to be the person who ruins their honeymoon over a chair?" The cabin, which had been filled with the low hum of conversation, began to quiet. Heads were starting to turn. Passengers in 6C and 8A were now openly staring. Danielle felt a flush of anger, hot and sharp, but she suppressed it with the discipline of 1,000 boardroom negotiations. Losing her composure was exactly what Brenda wanted. It would allow her to reframe the narrative. Danielle wasn't a passenger defending her rights. She was an angry black woman creating a scene. "The only person being difficult," Danielle said, her voice clear and precise, cutting through the cabin's hush, "is you. You are harassing me. I have given you my final answer. Please return to your duties." Tiffany Henderson gasped dramatically. "Harassing you? She's just trying to help us. This is ridiculous." Brenda saw her opening. She now had allies in her manufactured drama. She crossed her arms, adopting a posture of righteous indignation. "Ma'am, if you are not willing to cooperate with the flight crew, you are in violation of Federal Aviation regulations. I could have you removed from this flight." The threat hung in the air, audacious and ugly. It was a gross overreach of her authority, and both she and Danielle knew it. A passenger refusing to switch seats was not a federal offense. But Brenda was counting on the fact that the average person wouldn't know that. She was using the specter of law and authority as a bludgeon, expecting Danielle to crumble under the weight of the public spectacle and the fear of being deplaned. The other passengers now looked on with a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity. No one intervened. They were all waiting to see what would happen next. Danielle felt a profound sense of weariness settle over her. She had a grueling international flight ahead of her, and a critical presentation to deliver to the world's leading aviation experts. The last thing she wanted or needed was this ugly, pointless conflict. She could have just given in. It would have been easier. Just move to 14B, stew in silent anger for 8 hours, and let the injustice pass. But then she thought about every other time she had been expected to shrink, to acquiesce, to make herself smaller to accommodate the entitlement of others. She thought about the young engineers she mentored, especially the young women of color, whom she was constantly advising to stand their ground and know their worth. What kind of example would she be if she buckled now under the most transparently prejudiced pressure? No, this was not just about a seat anymore. It was about her right to occupy the space she had earned. It was about dignity. Brenda, sensing a moment of hesitation, pressed her advantage. So what is it going to be? Are you going to move, or am I going to have to call the captain and the ground crew to escort you off this plane? Her voice was smug. She believed she had won. Danielle looked at Brenda, then at the gawking Hendersons, and then at the other silent passengers. She took a slow, deliberate breath. The time for quiet refusal was over. The time for education had begun. Actually, Danielle said, her voice dropping into a calm, almost unnervingly placid register. Calling the captain is an excellent idea. But before you do that, there's something you need to see. She reached down, not for her purse or her boarding pass, but for the sleek, professional briefcase at her feet. She clicked the two brass latches open with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent cabin. Brenda watched, a smirk playing on her lips, assuming Danielle was bluffing, perhaps reaching for a complaint form or a frequent flyer card to plead her case. She was not. With a fluid, practiced motion, Danielle retrieved a dark blue, leather-bound portfolio from her briefcase. It was the kind of official-looking document holder that bespoke seriousness and bureaucracy. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked directly into Brenda's eyes, her own gaze unwavering and intense. "Brenda," she began, using the flight attendant's name for the first time, her voice devoid of any emotion except a cold, hard finality. "You cited federal aviation regulations in your threat to have me removed from this aircraft. I'd like you to be more specific. Which regulation exactly would I be violating by occupying the seat that I legally purchased?" Brenda faltered. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She had been bluffing, of course, using the vague threat of authority as a weapon. She never expected to be challenged on the specifics. It's failure to comply with crew member instructions," she stammered, grasping for the common catch-all phrase. "That's correct," Danielle acknowledged, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 9111, states that no person may assault, threaten, intimidate, or interfere with a crew member in the performance of the crew member's duties aboard an aircraft being operated. The key phrase there, Brenda, is in the performance of the crew member's duties. Your duties involve ensuring the safety and security of this cabin. They do not involve coercing passengers to surrender their paid-for seats to accommodate other passengers' preferences. What you are doing is not a duty. It is harassment. And your threat to have me removed constitutes intimidation. A ripple of shock went through the nearby passengers. This was not the response anyone had anticipated. Danielle spoke with the precision of a lawyer and the certainty of an expert. Brenda's face paled slightly. I'm just trying to resolve a situation." "No," Danielle countered, her voice dropping even lower, becoming a sharp, piercing instrument. "You created a situation. Now I'm going to resolve it." She flipped open the leather portfolio. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license or a passport. It was a government credential. It was dominated by a gold-embossed seal of the U.S. Department of Transportation and a bold, holographic eagle. Her photograph was in the top left corner, professional and stern, but it was the text below the photo that made the air freeze in Brenda's lungs. Danielle A. Sterling, Director, Office of Airworthiness Standards, Federal Aviation Administration, Aviation Safety Inspector, credential, number 774, A1138. Below her title, in smaller but equally authoritative print, were the words, "The bearer of this credential is vested with the authority pursuant to Title 49 of the United States Code to conduct inspections and investigations, and is entitled to free and uninterrupted access to all parts of the aircraft and all relevant records." Danielle held it up for Brenda to see clearly. The silence in the cabin was now absolute, thick and heavy. Even the Hendersons seemed to have stopped breathing. Brenda's eyes darted from the photo to the title, then to the seal, and back again. The colour drained completely from her face, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mind, which seconds before had been buzzing with smug authority, simply stopped. It was a full-system crash. The woman she had been threatening, bullying, and trying to publicly shame was not just some random passenger. She was a high-ranking official in the very federal agency that governed every aspect of her job, from her training certification to the airworthiness of the very plane they were sitting in. A director, an aviation safety inspector. Danielle wasn't just a passenger on the plane. In a very real sense, she was a part of the authority that allowed the plane to fly. The junior flight attendant, Chloe, who had a clearer view from the aisle, let out a small, audible gasp. She immediately understood the catastrophic magnitude of Brenda's miscalculation. Danielle held the credentials steady for a few more seconds, letting the full weight of the situation settle on Brenda. Then she spoke again, her voice no longer cold, but now carrying the immense weight of her office. "Brenda Walsh, employee number 481506, Danielle stated, having noted the number on her name tag earlier. "You have interfered with a passenger, you have misrepresented federal regulations, and you have created a hostile and unprofessional environment in this cabin. Your actions are a direct contravention of the standards of conduct your air carrier certificate is contingent upon. You invoked the captain's authority. I suggest you go and get him. Now, and bring your flight service director with you." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Every word was a hammer blow, delivered with the devastating precision of someone who not only knew the rules, but had likely helped to write them. Brenda just stood there, frozen, her mouth slightly agape. She looked like a statue, her mind utterly incapable of processing the career-ending chasm that had just opened up beneath her feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic event. The walk to the cockpit must have been the longest of Brenda Walsh's life. She moved like a wind-up toy that was running down, her steps stiff and robotic. Chloe, the junior flight attendant, scurried ahead of her, her face a mask of panic, whispering urgently to the flight service director, a polished man in his 50s named Gregory. A few moments later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Robert Peterson emerged. He was tall, with graying temples, and an air of unflappable calm that came from decades of handling everything from transatlantic crossings to severe weather emergencies. He followed Gregory down the aisle, his expression neutral but inquisitive. He'd been told there was a passenger issue, a common enough occurrence. He was not prepared for what he was about to find. He arrived at seat 7A to a tableau of silent tension. Danielle was sitting calmly, her FAA credentials still resting open on her console table. The Hendersons were frozen in a state of awkward, guilty silence, trying to make themselves invisible. Brenda stood behind her superiors, looking utterly defeated. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Captain Peterson. I understand there's a problem here?" he asked, his voice a calm baritone. Danielle met his gaze. "Good morning, Captain. There is." She gestured to her open credential. "Dr. Danielle Sterling, FAA." Captain Peterson's eyes fell to the portfolio. His professional composure didn't break, but a flicker of recognition and immediate seriousness crossed his face. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He nodded crisply. "Dr. Sterling, it's an honor. I've read some of your office's papers on composite stress testing." "I'm glad they're getting read," Danielle replied, a hint of dry irony in her voice. "Unfortunately, my pre-flight reading was interrupted." The captain's gaze shifted to Brenda, then to Gregory, and his expression hardened. He was no fool. He could piece together the basics of the situation in an instant. A high-ranking FAA official, a dispute over a seat, and a flight attendant who clearly looked like she'd been caught in a career-ending blunder. "Captain," Danielle continued, her voice clear and factual, recounting the events without embellishment or emotion. "I was in my assigned, pre-selected seat. Your flight attendant, Ms. Walsh, demanded I move to a lesser seat to accommodate these other passengers. When I declined, she attempted to coerce me by creating a public scene, misrepresenting FAA regulations, and threatening to have me removed from your aircraft." Captain Peterson listened intently, his jaw tightening with every word. When Danielle finished, he turned to Brenda. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Brenda, is this an accurate account of what transpired?" Brenda, unable to meet his eyes, mumbled, "I was just trying to help the Hendersons." "That is not what I asked," the captain cut her off, his voice like ice. "Is Dr. Sterling's account accurate?" "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. Captain Peterson took a deep breath, the controlled exhale of a man furious but maintaining professional decorum. He turned back to Danielle. "Dr. Sterling, on behalf of Transatlantic Air and this entire crew, I offer you my most sincere and profound apologies. This is absolutely unacceptable. It is unprofessional, it is a gross misrepresentation of this airline's policies, and it will be dealt with immediately and severely, I assure you." He then looked at the Hendersons, who seemed to shrink under his glare. "And you too. Your flight is already paid for. You can sit in your assigned seats, or we can find you another flight on another day. There will be no more discussion about seat changes. Is that understood?" Mark and Tiffany Henderson nodded meekly, their faces burning with humiliation. They shuffled away without another word, retreating to their separate assigned seats, the dream of their second honeymoon kickoff thoroughly demolished. Finally, the captain addressed Brenda and Gregory. "Gregory, take Ms. Walsh to the aft galley. She is off duty for the remainder of this flight. She is not to interact with another passenger. Chloe will take over her duties for this cabin. I will deal with this personally when we land in Zurich, and I will be filing a full flight report with corporate before we even begin our descent." The words were a death sentence for Brenda's career, and everyone knew it. To be removed from duty mid-flight, before takeoff, was the ultimate humiliation, a clear and public declaration of utter failure. Gregory nodded grimly and gestured for the now ashen Brenda to follow him. As she walked away, a few of the other passengers who had witnessed the event gave her looks of pure contempt. The spectacle was over. Captain Peterson turned back to Danielle one last time. "Again, Doctor, my apologies. Please, if there is anything at all you need for the rest of this flight, anything, you ask for me directly. I hope we can still provide you with a safe and, from this point forward, peaceful journey to Zurich." "Thank you, Captain," Danielle said, finally closing her leather portfolio. "I appreciate your professionalism." He gave a final, respectful nod and returned to the cockpit. The cabin door was secured, the safety announcements were made by a flustered but composed Chloe, and the giant Airbus A350 finally pushed back from the gate. As the aircraft taxied towards the runway, Danielle looked out the window. She had won the battle, but she felt no sense of triumph, only a deep, lingering exhaustion. The incident was a stark reminder that even here, in the structured world of aviation she loved, some things were still depressingly predictable. The flight had just begun, but the official proceedings were far from over. The 8-hour flight to Zurich was, on the surface, peaceful. Chloe, the young flight attendant, was exceptionally attentive, almost reverential, toward Danielle. The flight service director, Gregory, stopped by twice to personally apologize again and to see if she needed anything. Danielle was gracious, but brief. She had no interest in being placated with champagne and extra dessert. She wanted systemic accountability. She tried to rest, but her mind was abuzz. The confrontation had shaken her more than she cared to admit. It wasn't the personal insult that stung the most. It was the galling abuse of authority. A flight attendant's primary role is safety. They are the first responders at 35,000 feet. For Brenda to weaponize that authority over something as petty as a seating arrangement was a fundamental betrayal of her profession. Upon landing in Zurich, Danielle disembarked and went straight to her hotel. She delivered her keynote address the next day to a packed auditorium. She spoke with passion and precision about the future of aviation safety, her words carrying the extra weight of her recent experience. No one in the audience could have guessed the drama that had preceded her arrival, but she did not let it go. During a break in the conference, she sat in her quiet hotel room and drafted 2 emails. The first was to the Executive Vice President of Customer Relations for Transatlantic Air, a man she had met at a previous industry event. The second was to her own superior at the FAA, Director Frank Miller, head of the Aviation Safety AVS line of business. Her emails were models of professional conciseness. She laid out the facts of the incident involving flight attendant Brenda Walsh, employee NAR 4812FY6, on TAA Flight 112. She detailed the unprompted demand, the escalation, the public shaming, the misrepresentation of federal regulations, and the direct threat of removal from the aircraft. She attached a scan of her official flight booking and seat selection confirmation. She concluded not with a demand for compensation, but with a formal request for a full investigation into the training, conduct, and professional standards of the flight attendant in question. For the FAA, she officially opened a case file, flagging it as a potential violation of crew competency and professionalism standards under Part 121. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Transatlantic Air executive called her personal cell phone within the hour. He was mortified, apologetic, and promised a swift and thorough internal investigation. "Dr. Sterling, this is not who we are," he insisted. "Ms. Walsh has been placed on immediate, unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of our investigation. The report from Captain Peterson was already on my desk when I arrived this morning, and it corroborates every word you've said." Frank Miller's email from the FAA was even more direct. "Danielle, I am appalled. This is precisely the kind of conduct we cannot and will not tolerate. I am launching a formal FAA inquiry. We will be requesting all of TAA's records on this employee, including her training history, performance reviews, and any prior complaints. We will get to the bottom of this. Focus on the symposium. We've got this." The wheels of 2 massive bureaucracies, one corporate and one federal, began to grind into motion, all because one flight attendant chose the wrong passenger to bully. The TAA investigation moved quickly. They interviewed Captain Peterson, Gregory, and Chloe. Chloe's testimony was particularly damning. With the protection of the investigation, she tearfully admitted that Brenda had a reputation for being a cabin tyrant, especially toward passengers she seemed to arbitrarily dislike. She had a history of making passive-aggressive comments and using her seniority to intimidate both junior crew and passengers. Several other flight attendants, when promised anonymity, came forward with similar stories. Brenda Walsh wasn't having a bad day. She had a pattern of behavior. Simultaneously, the FAA inquiry began digging into Brenda's official records. They pulled her file, a thick manila folder filled with 2 decades of certifications, recurrent training sign-offs, and performance checks. An investigator, a sharp-eyed veteran named Michael Chen, was assigned the case. He noticed something odd. Brenda's recurrent security and crew resource management training, mandatory annual refreshers, had been signed off by the same TAA instructor for the past 6 years, an instructor who had retired 7 years ago. It was a small detail, but it was the loose thread that would unravel everything. Michael Chen cross-referenced the training dates with Brenda's flight logs. On at least 3 of the dates, she was supposedly in a day-long training seminar in Dallas. She had actually been working a flight to Frankfurt. She hadn't just been a bully. She had been actively falsifying her federally mandated safety and security training records for years, and somehow it had slipped through the cracks of the airline's oversight. The issue had now escalated far beyond an unprofessional confrontation over a seat. It had become a serious matter of federal compliance and aviation security. Brenda Walsh hadn't just intimidated a passenger. She had potentially been flying for years without the proper, up-to-date knowledge of security protocols and emergency procedures. She was a liability, not just to customer service, but to the safety of every flight she had worked. While the official investigations proceeded with bureaucratic quiet, the public fallout began, sparked by an unexpected source. A passenger sitting in 8C, a tech entrepreneur named Kevin, had discreetly filmed the initial part of the confrontation on his phone. He had captured Brenda's condescending tone, Danielle's calm refusals, and Mark Henderson's loud, obnoxious comment about her being selfish. He hadn't filmed Danielle revealing her credentials. He had stopped recording out of discomfort right before that moment. After the flight, disturbed by what he had witnessed, he posted the 2-minute clip to his Twitter account with the caption, "Disgraceful behavior from a transatlantic air flight attendant, and passengers trying to bully a woman out of her paid-for-business class seat." She handled it with pure class. The video went viral overnight. By the time Danielle was flying home from Zurich, the clip had millions of views. The court of public opinion is swift and merciless. Transatlantic Air's social media was inundated with furious comments. Amateur sleuths on the internet identified the Hendersons within hours. Mark Henderson was a senior vice president at a major commercial real estate firm in Washington, D.C. His face, contorted in a sneer as he stood behind Brenda, was now plastered all over social media. His company, which prided itself on its image of diversity and inclusion, was tagged thousands of times. The first domino fell 2 days later. Mark Henderson was called into his CEO's office. He was fired on the spot. The company released a public statement condemning his behavior and reiterating their commitment to respect and integrity. The second domino was his wife, Tiffany. She was a mid-level wellness and positivity influencer on Instagram with a modest but dedicated following. Her brand was built on a curated image of serene yoga poses and inspirational quotes about kindness. The video was a direct contradiction to her entire public persona. Her comment section became a wasteland of vitriol, accusing her of hypocrisy and entitlement. Sponsors dropped her, and her follower count plummeted. Her influencer career was over before she could post her next picture of avocado toast. The Hendersons' misguided attempt to sit together had cost them their reputations and a significant portion of their income. They had hitched their wagon to Brenda's aggression, and now they were paying the price. But the final, and hardest, karma was reserved for Brenda Walsh. A month after the flight, she was formally terminated by Transatlantic Air for gross misconduct. Her union fought it, but presented with the mountain of evidence from the internal investigation, including the damning testimony from her own colleagues, they quietly withdrew their support. Losing her job after 25 years was a devastating blow. The truly career-ending news, however, came from the FAA. The investigation into her falsified training records concluded. It was an open and shut case. The FAA issued an emergency order of revocation for her flight attendant certificate of demonstrated proficiency. The language of the order was brutal and clinical. Due to evidence of intentional falsification of required training records, Brenda Walsh has demonstrated that she lacks the requisite care, judgment, and responsibility required of a certificate holder. Her continued service would constitute an unacceptable risk to aviation safety. The revocation was permanent. It wasn't just that she couldn't fly for Transatlantic Air. She could never again work as a flight attendant for any U.S. air carrier. She was barred from the profession for life. The career she had built, the authority she had lorded over others, was gone. Stripped away not just because she had been a bully, but because she had been a cheat. The news report of the FAA's action was a small article on an aviation industry website. But for Brenda, it was the final nail in her professional coffin. Her name was now synonymous not just with bad customer service, but with a serious breach of federal aviation safety standards. In trying to force one woman out of her seat, she had ejected herself from the entire industry. 6 months later, Danielle Sterling stood at a podium in a hangar at the Udvar Hazy Center, the Smithsonian's massive air and space museum annex near Dulles Airport. Behind her, the sleek, black form of the SR-71 Blackbird stretched into the distance. She was the keynote speaker for the annual Women in Aviation outreach event, designed to inspire high school and college students to pursue careers in the field. She looked out at the sea of bright, eager faces, mostly young women, many of them women of color. She spoke about the wonders of aerospace engineering, the challenges of regulation, and the profound responsibility of keeping the skies safe. Toward the end of her speech, she paused. "I want to tell you something personal," she said, her voice softening. "In your careers, you will inevitably encounter turbulence. And I'm not talking about the kind you feel at 30,000 feet. You will encounter people who question your right to be in the room, at the table, or even in the seat you rightfully occupy. They will challenge your authority, dismiss your expertise, and mistake your composure for weakness." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. "When that happens," she continued, "you must remember 2 things. First, know your facts. Be better prepared, more knowledgeable, and more professional than anyone else. Your competence is your armor. Second, know the rules. Not just the technical rules of your job, but the rules of engagement, the regulations, the standards of conduct. Because authority isn't just about a title on a business card or a uniform. True authority comes from integrity and a mastery of the principles you stand for." She never mentioned Flight 112 or Brenda Walsh by name. She didn't need to. The lesson was universal. After her speech, a young black woman, a student at Howard University studying aeronautical engineering, approached her. "Dr. Sterling," she said, her eyes shining with admiration, "thank you for that. Sometimes it feels like you have to be twice as good just to get half the respect." Danielle smiled a genuine, warm smile. "Then we become 3 times as good," she said, placing a reassuring hand on the young woman's shoulder. "And we use that knowledge not just to build better airplanes, but to build a better, fairer industry for everyone who comes after us." She never heard what happened to the Hendersons after their public shaming. As for Brenda Walsh, a former colleague mentioned seeing her working a checkout counter at a discount home goods store near the airport. A woman who once commanded a cabin in the sky now asked, "Paper or plastic?" In the shadow of the runways, she could no longer travel. Danielle felt no pleasure in this. Brenda's downfall was a tragedy of her own making, a result of small cruelties and large deceptions finally catching up to her. Danielle's goal had never been revenge. It had been to uphold a standard, the standard of professionalism, respect, and, above all, safety. As she left the museum that evening, she looked up at the sky, a deep, clear blue fading into twilight. A plane, its lights blinking, was on its final approach to Dulles. It was a beautiful, ordinary sight, a symbol of a system that, for all its imperfections, worked, a system she had dedicated her life to protecting, and she felt a sense of peace, a genuine peace, knowing that the sky was just a little bit safer, and the world on the ground just a little bit more just. A year and a half after the flight to Zurich, the incident had faded from the viral news cycle, becoming just another piece of digital history. But its echoes continued to shape the lives of those involved, demonstrating that the truest consequences are not the loud, sudden impacts, but the quiet, lasting changes in altitude. Dr. Danielle Sterling was in a grand ballroom in Washington, D.C., the air filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and hushed, important conversations. She was attending the annual Wings Foundation Gala, a cornerstone event for the aviation industry, to receive the Catherine Wright Memorial Award for Leadership and Integrity. It was an award that recognized not a single act, but a lifetime of contribution to the advancement and safety of aviation. As the presenter detailed her career, her pioneering research at MIT, her steady hand in guiding the FAA through complex certification processes, her mentorship of the next generation, Danielle felt a profound sense of gratitude. She hadn't sought the spotlight, but she accepted the responsibility that came with it. When she stepped up to the podium, the applause was thunderous. "Integrity," she began, her voice steady and clear, "is like the hidden framework of an aircraft. It's not the part you see, not the sleek wings or the powerful engines. It's the internal structure that bears the stress, that holds everything together when you hit unexpected turbulence. It must be strong at every level, from the design floor to the halls of regulation, and yes, to the cabin aisle. Upholding that integrity is a duty we all share." She never mentioned TAA Flight 112. She didn't have to. The people in this room, airline executives, fellow regulators, engineers, knew the story. They knew her quiet stand had prompted real change. Transatlantic Air, in the wake of the public relations disaster, had launched a top-to-bottom overhaul of its in-flight service training, now centered on de-escalation and a passenger's Bill of Rights. More significantly, the FAA's investigation into Brenda Walsh's falsified records had uncovered systemic loopholes. This led to Danielle's office spearheading the Crew Integrity Verification Initiative, a new digital auditing system that cross-referenced training logs with flight schedules across all major U.S. carriers, ensuring such a deception could never happen again. Her personal moment of trial had become a permanent safety improvement for millions of travelers. Meanwhile, in a sprawling, impersonal suburb 30 miles away, Brenda Walsh was finishing her shift. Her world was no longer one of exotic layovers and professional authority. It was the harsh fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors of a Pricewise, a massive discount supermarket. Her job was to manage the fleet of shopping carts. She spent her days pushing long, rattling lines of metal baskets from the sun-baked parking lot back into the store. That evening, as she gathered the last stray cart, a plane roared low overhead, its landing lights cutting through the dusk on its final approach to Dulles. It was a TAA A350. Brenda froze, her hands gripping the cold metal bar. She looked up, her face a mixture of longing and raw bitterness. In her mind, she was still the victim. She had been made an example of, a sacrifice to corporate political correctness. She blamed the Hendersons for being so needy, her colleagues for betraying her, and most of all, she blamed the stone-faced woman in seat 7A. She never once considered that her own actions, the bullying, and more importantly, the years of quiet fraud, were the true cause of her freefall. The loss of her job was bad enough, but the loss of her identity as a flight attendant had hollowed her out completely. That uniform had been her armor, and without it, she felt exposed, insignificant, and trapped on the ground. As for the Hendersons, their public shaming had subsided, but their lives were irrevocably altered. Mark eventually found a new, lower-paying job at a smaller firm, his once bright career path permanently dimmed. Tiffany had deleted her social media, unable to handle the mockery that still surfaced from time to time. They were still together, but their relationship was strained by financial stress and lingering resentment. They were on a road trip, a budget-conscious vacation to a crowded beach, a world away from the Swiss Alps. Sitting in a noisy, sticky-tabled seaside restaurant, they argued about the bill. "If you hadn't insisted on complaining," Tiffany hissed. "If you hadn't been so dramatic, none of it would have happened," Mark retorted. They were united only in their refusal to accept their own role in the debacle, forever blaming the flight attendant and the selfish woman for their fall from grace. Back at the gala, Danielle held the heavy crystal award in her hands. It wasn't a trophy for winning a fight. It was recognition for a career spent ensuring the fight was never necessary. The incident on Flight 112 was just one unexpected test of a lifetime of resolve. Her real victory wasn't putting Brenda Walsh in her place. It was in creating a system where, hopefully, the next Dr. Sterling wouldn't have to. Authority, she reflected, wasn't the credential in her wallet. It was the unwavering commitment to the principles that credential represented, a commitment she knew would keep the skies safe, long after her name was forgotten. 3 years after the Wings Gala, the rhythms of Dr. Danielle Sterling's life continued, defined by work, travel, and a quiet sense of purpose. The incident on Flight 112 had become a distant memory, a story she sometimes thought of when mentoring young professionals, but it no longer carried any emotional weight. The changes it had sparked within the industry were now simply part of the established system, working silently in the background. She landed at Dulles on a crisp autumn afternoon, returning from a week of international safety audits in Lisbon. The trip had been productive, the flight home uneventful. It was the kind of routine she cherished. Instead of heading straight home, she decided to stop at a large supermarket a few miles from the airport to pick up some groceries for the week. Walking through the brightly lit aisles, pushing a cart, she was anonymous, just another citizen running errands. It was a stark contrast to the authority she wielded in her professional life, and she enjoyed the simple normalcy of it. As she rounded the corner into the coffee aisle, scanning the shelves for her favorite dark roast, she heard a voice nearby directing another employee. "No, the decaf promotional display goes on the end cap. Corporate was very clear about that." The voice was flat, tired, and stripped of all its former arrogance, but it was unmistakably familiar. Danielle froze. She looked towards the end of the aisle. Standing there, wearing the faded red smock of a price-wise shift manager, was Brenda Walsh. Brenda looked older than Danielle remembered. Her hair was no longer perfectly coiffed, but pulled back in a simple, severe ponytail. There were deep lines of exhaustion around her eyes and mouth. She was thinner, and the sharp, assertive posture she once used to command a cabin had been replaced by a weary slump. As she turned after speaking to her co-worker, her eyes met Danielle's. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Recognition dawned on Brenda's face, followed by a complex storm of emotions: shame, panic, and then a surprising, bleak resignation. She looked as though she had played this potential encounter in her mind 1,000 times, and now that it was here, she had no energy left to fight it. Danielle simply stood there, her expression neutral. She felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. It was like looking at a ghost from a past life. Brenda was the one who broke the silence. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands fidgeting with the box cutter clipped to her belt. "Dr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Brenda," Danielle replied quietly. Brenda looked down at the scuffed floor, then back up, forcing herself to meet Danielle's gaze. I know this is random, and you don't have to say anything, but I needed to tell you. I'm sorry." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of genuine regret, not self-pity. "It was never about the seat. I see that now. It was about me. I was unhappy. I felt powerless in my own life, and making demands on that plane. It was the only place I felt like I had any control. It was wrong. I was wrong. I cost myself everything because I was a bully. I just needed to say that to you." The confession hung in the air between the neatly stacked bags of coffee beans. It was raw, painful, and utterly sincere. Years of bitterness had finally given way to a difficult, humbling truth. Danielle listened, and in that moment she saw Brenda not as an antagonist, but simply as a person whose own flaws had led her to ruin. The story was finally complete. "Thank you for saying that," Danielle said, her voice gentle but firm. "I hear you. I wish you peace, Brenda." She gave a small, final nod, then turned and pushed her cart down the aisle, leaving Brenda standing alone by the promotional display. She didn't look back. She finished her shopping, paid at the self-checkout, and walked out into the cool evening air. As she drove home, the last rays of sunset streaking the sky in shades of orange and violet, she reflected on the encounter. The final piece of the saga hadn't brought a feeling of victory, but of closure. Karma, she realized, wasn't a lightning bolt of cosmic revenge. It was a slow, steady, and inevitable arrival at a destination of one's own making. Brenda's journey had led her here, to this quiet admission in a grocery store aisle, and Danielle's journey continued forward. She was heading home, to a life built not on the conflicts she had won, but on the standards she had upheld and the contributions she had made. The turbulence was long past. Before her, there was only the clear, open sky. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It was a story about the clash between unearned arrogance and earned authority. Dr. Danielle Sterling didn't seek a confrontation, but when it came, she met it not with anger, but with the quiet, unshakable power of her own accomplishments and integrity. Brenda Walsh, the Hendersons, they all learned a hard lesson that day. Your character is revealed not when you have power, but in how you treat those you think have none. The karma in this story wasn't magic. It was the logical consequence of actions, a testament to the fact that sooner or later we are all held accountable. What do you think? Was the captain's response strong enough? Was the karma that hit the flight attendant and the other couple deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories about justice and accountability resonate with you, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true stories where integrity wins the day. Thanks for listening.